Welcome to another journey into the darkest corners of true history, where reality proves more terrifying than any fiction ever written. Before we begin tonight's tale, I want to ask you a favor. If you're finding these stories as captivating and chilling as I hope they are, please take just a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Your support helps me bring you more of these forgotten horrors from our world's hidden past. And if you know someone who appreciates a good mystery wrapped in genuine terror, share this story with them. The best horror stories are those shared in whispered conversations. Tonight, I'm taking you to the remote Flannan Isles off the coast of Scotland, to a lighthouse that became the center of one of maritime history's most baffling and terrifying mysteries. This is not a work of fiction. This is not an urban legend passed down through generations. This is a documented case that has puzzled investigators for over a century. A real event so strange and horrifying that the official explanations feel more like desperate attempts to avoid confronting an impossible truth. 3 experienced lighthouse keepers vanished without a trace from their post on a barren island surrounded by turbulent seas. They left behind evidence of their growing terror, physical impossibilities that defied the laws of nature, and questions that remain unanswered to this day. What you're about to hear is the complete account of the vanishing of Eilean Mor, true story of 3 rational men who encountered something beyond human understanding and paid the ultimate price for their proximity to forces older and more powerful than civilization itself. So settle in, dim the lights, and prepare yourself for a journey into one of history's most chilling, unsolved mysteries. This is the story of the lighthouse keepers who heard the call from the depths and answered it. In the frigid waters off the western coast of Scotland, where the Atlantic Ocean crashes against ancient rocks with primordial fury, stands a cluster of remote islands known as the Flannan Isles. These barren, wind-swept outcrops have witnessed countless storms, shipwrecks, and tragedies throughout the centuries, but none so haunting, none so inexplicable as the events that unfolded during the winter of 1900. The largest of these islands, Eilean Mor, housed a newly constructed lighthouse, a towering beacon of hope, meant to guide vessels safely through the treacherous waters. Yet this lighthouse would become the center of one of maritime history's, a puzzle that remains unsolved to this day, defying every attempt at rational explanation. The Flannan Isles lighthouse had been operational for barely a year when the horror began. Built at tremendous expense and considerable difficulty, the structure stood 75 feet tall, its powerful beam visible for 24 nautical miles on a clear night. The lighthouse represented the pinnacle of Victorian engineering, constructed with the finest materials and equipped with the most advanced optical equipment of the era. 3 men were assigned to maintain this vital installation. Principal Keeper James Duquette, a seasoned lighthouse veteran with over 20 years of experience. Assistant keeper Thomas Marshall, a reliable family man known for his meticulous record-keeping. An occasional keeper, Donald MacArthur, the youngest of the three, who had recently replaced William Ross due to illness. These were not ordinary men, frightened by shadows and superstition. They were professional lighthouse keepers, chosen for their steady nerves, practical skills, and ability to endure months of isolation on a barren rock surrounded by hostile seas. They had weathered countless storms, maintained their equipment through the harshest conditions, and kept their light burning when ships' lives depended upon it. The routine was well established and strictly followed. Every day at noon, the keepers would signal to the mainland using a system of flags and mirror flashes, confirming that all was well. Weather permitting, a relief boat would visit every 2 weeks, bringing supplies, mail, and news from the outside world. The Northern Lighthouse Board had invested heavily in this system, and the keepers understood their critical responsibility to the maritime community. In early December 1900, the weather around the Flannan Isles had been particularly brutal. Storm after storm swept across the North Atlantic, generating waves that towered above the lighthouse itself. Ships seeking shelter reported seeing the beacon operational during the early days of December, its beam cutting through the darkness and spray. A reassuring presence in the chaos of the winter storms. But on December 7th, something changed. The first sign of trouble came from the steamship Arctur. Passing the islands on its route from Philadelphia to Leith, Captain Holman noted in his log that the Flannan Light was not visible. Despite clear conditions and excellent visibility, this was unusual, but not unprecedented mechanical failures could occur, and perhaps the keepers were conducting repairs. However, when the relief vessel Hesperus approached the island on December 15th, 8 days later, the crew immediately sensed something was terribly wrong. The lighthouse stood dark and silent against the gray December sky. No smoke rose from the chimney of the keeper's quarters. No figures moved on the landing platform. The island appeared completely deserted. Captain James Harvey of the Hesperus blew his ship's horn repeatedly. He fired a distress rocket into the air, its red trail stark against the overcast sky. He waited, scanning the shoreline through his telescope for any sign of the three keepers. Nothing. The island remained as still as a graveyard. Unable to land immediately due to rough seas, Harvey was forced to anchor offshore overnight, his crew keeping constant watch on the lighthouse. As darkness fell, they strained their eyes for any glimmer of light, any indication that the keepers were alive and well. The lighthouse remained dark throughout the long December night, its silence more ominous than any storm. The following morning, December 16th, the seas had calmed sufficiently to allow a landing party to go ashore. Harvey selected his most experienced crew members for the dangerous task of reaching the island's narrow, rocky pier. As their small boat approached the landing, they could see that the iron railings were bent and twisted, as if some tremendous force had struck them. The first man ashore was Joseph Moore, the relief keeper who had come to replace MacArthur. Moore was an experienced lighthouse keeper himself, familiar with the isolation and potential hazards of the job. But as he climbed the steep path toward the lighthouse, a growing sense of dread settled over him. The lighthouse door stood closed but unlocked. Moore pushed it open and stepped inside, calling out the names of his colleagues. His voice echoed through empty rooms, answered only by the sound of wind whistling through the building. The main living area showed signs of recent habitation. Breakfast dishes sat on the table, half-finished meals growing cold and moldy. A chair lay overturned on the floor. Moore climbed the spiral staircase to the light room at the top of the tower. The massive lens apparatus stood idle, its oil reservoirs full, the wick trimmed and ready for lighting. Everything appeared to be in perfect working order, yet the light had not been burning for days. Returning to the keeper's quarters, Moore began to notice disturbing details. In the kitchen, he found a meal partially prepared but abandoned. Potatoes had been peeled and left in a pot of water, now discolored and slimy. Tea had been set out for 3 people, the cups still sitting on the table as if the men had simply vanished mid-conversation. The principal keeper's logbook lay open on the desk, Decat's meticulous handwriting recording routine observations and maintenance activities up until December 13th. The final entry was unremarkable, noting wind conditions and oil consumption. There was no indication of distress, no hint of the catastrophe that was about to unfold. But it was in the clothing storage area that Moore made his most disturbing discovery. 2 of the lighthouse's regulation oilskin coats hung on their hooks, dry and unused. The 3rd was missing. This meant that only one of the 3 keepers had been wearing protective clothing when they left the lighthouse. In the harsh December weather of the North Atlantic, this was tantamount to suicide for anyone venturing outside for more than a few minutes. Moore rushed back to signal the Hesperus crew. The relief vessel's horn sounded the emergency pattern, its mournful wail carrying across the water to alert authorities on the mainland. As more crew members came ashore to assist in the search, they discovered additional unsettling evidence. The island's supply of fresh water was untouched, ruling out dehydration as a cause for the men to leave their post. The lighthouse's backup supplies were intact enough food and fuel to last for weeks. The radio equipment, though primitive by modern standards, was in perfect working order. Most mysteriously, The lighthouse's massive entrance door showed no signs of forced entry. The heavy wooden barrier, designed to withstand the most severe Atlantic storms, could only be opened from the inside, or with a key that the keepers carried. Yet, it had been found closed but unlocked, as if the keepers had simply walked out and never returned. The search party expanded their investigation to every corner of the small island. Eilean Mor was less than half a mile long and a quarter-mile wide, with no places for men to hide or take shelter other than the lighthouse itself. The rocky terrain was thoroughly examined, every crevice and potential hiding spot investigated. They found no bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of where 3 grown men could have gone on a barren island surrounded by turbulent seas. As the December daylight faded, the search party faced a chilling reality. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur had simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt maritime circles for generations to come. The Northern Lighthouse Board was immediately notified, and within days, investigators arrived from Edinburgh to conduct a thorough inquiry into the disappearance. What they discovered would only deepen the mystery and add new layers of inexplicable horror to an already baffling case. Robert Muirhead, superintendent of the Northern Lighthouse Board, arrived on Eilean Mor 3 days after the initial discovery. A methodical man with decades of experience in lighthouse operations, Muirhead had investigated numerous accidents and incidents throughout the Scottish Islands. But nothing in his extensive career had prepared him for what he would find on this windswept rock. Accompanying Muirhead was Captain Harvey Brown, a maritime investigator known for his analytical mind and attention to detail. Together, they began the most thorough examination ever conducted of a lighthouse facility, documenting every detail, every anomaly, every possible clue that might explain the impossible disappearance of 3 experienced keepers. The lighthouse itself revealed a story written in maintenance logs, weather observations, and the mundane details of daily routine. The keepers had been diligent in their duties right up until their disappearance. Oil consumption records were precisely maintained, showing that the light had been burning regularly until December 13th. Weather observations continued through that same date, with Ducat noting severe gales from West Sea lashed to fury. Never seen such a storm. But it was Ducat's personal notes, discovered tucked inside his Bible, that provided the first hint of something deeply unsettling occurring in the days before the vanishing. Written in his careful handwriting were observations that seemed increasingly agitated and fearful. December 10th, Marshall said he heard voices calling from the sea during the night watch. Told him it was wind in the rigging, but his face was white as death. December 11th, MacArthur refuses to tend the light alone after sunset. Says there are shapes moving in the water below the cliffs. We all heard the singing today. though no boats were visible for miles. December 12th. The sea speaks to us now in words we almost understand. God preserve us, for I fear we are not alone on this rock. These private entries, so different from Descartes' professional log, painted a picture of three rational men slowly being overwhelmed by forces they could not comprehend. Muirhead had known Descartes personally. The man was renowned for his steadiness under pressure, his practical nature, his complete absence of superstitious beliefs. Yet here was evidence of growing terror in his own handwriting. The physical investigation of the island revealed even more disturbing anomalies. The western cliff face, which bore the brunt of Atlantic storms, showed evidence of damage far beyond what even the most severe weather could inflict. Iron railings, designed to withstand hurricane-force winds, had been twisted into impossible shapes. Stone blocks, each weighing several tons, had been displaced from their foundations and scattered across the landing area. Most unnervingly, these stones bore marks that defied explanation. Deep gouges that appeared to have been made by something with claws or talons far larger than any known sea creature. The scratches formed patterns that seemed almost deliberate, as if some intelligence had been at work carving symbols into the ancient rock. Captain Harvey Brown discovered additional evidence near the lighthouse's base. The building's foundation showed stress fractures that suggested tremendous pressure had been applied from the outside. Windows on the lower level had been shattered, but the glass fragments lay inside the building, indicating the force had come from the exterior. Most mysteriously, the fragments were embedded in the opposite wall with such violence that they had penetrated several inches into solid stone. The weather records from the mainland provided crucial context for understanding what had occurred during those final days. The storm that had struck the Flannan Isles on December 13th was indeed severe, but not unprecedented for the region. Ships had weathered far worse conditions in those waters without incident. The lighthouse had been specifically designed such storms, and its construction had proven sound during previous severe weather. Yet something during that particular storm had been different. The steamship Helena, passing 40 miles southwest of the islands on December 13th, reported in its log an unusual phenomenon. Observed strange luminescence in vicinity of Flannan Isles, unlike any natural aurora. Light pulsed rhythmically, appeared to emanate from beneath the water's surface. Crew reported hearing whale song, but no whales sighted despite excellent visibility. The steamship Gloucester, traveling the same shipping lane 12 hours later, made an even more disturbing observation. Heavy seas running, but witnessed what appeared to be massive disturbance in water near Flannan Isles. Enormous waves moving against prevailing wind and current. Something very large moving beneath the surface. changed course to avoid area. Muirhead interviewed the crews of both vessels upon their return to port. The sailors, hardened men who had spent their lives on the North Atlantic, were visibly shaken by what they had witnessed. They spoke of sounds that seemed to come from the depths not, the familiar calls of whales or the crash of waves, but something that resembled human voices singing in harmony, their words lost in the wind, but their emotional content unmistakably sorrowful and beckoning. The investigation expanded to include the island's ancient history. Eilean Mor had been inhabited sporadically for over 1,000 years, with evidence of Celtic settlements and early Christian hermitages. Local folklore, dismissed by the Lighthouse authorities as primitive superstition, spoke of the islands as a place where the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the sea spirits grew thin. Dr. Alasdair MacLeod, a scholar of Celtic mythology from the University of Edinburgh, was consulted regarding the historical significance of the Flannan Isles. His research revealed disturbing parallels between the lighthouse keeper's disappearance and ancient legends of the area. The islands had been known to Celtic seafarers as Na Ich Linen Mora, the great island's places where offerings were made to appease the creatures that dwelt in the deepest waters. According to these old stories, the sea around the Flannans was home to beings of immense age and power, entities that had existed since before human memory. They were said to call two men from beneath the waves, their songs irresistible to those who heard them clearly. Those who answered the call would walk into the sea and disappear forever, joining the eternal chorus that sang from the depths. MacLeod's research uncovered records of similar disappearances throughout the centuries. In 1787, an entire fishing crew vanished from the islands during a calm night. Their boat found floating empty the next morning. In 1823, two naturalists studying seabirds disappeared without trace. Despite being excellent swimmers and experienced outdoorsmen, each incident occurred during the winter months, when the storms were at their most fierce and the boundary between sea and sky seemed to dissolve. The investigation took a particularly sinister turn when Muirhead discovered evidence that the keepers had not vanished simultaneously. The lighthouse's mechanical clock, a precision timepiece that required daily winding, had stopped at 3:17 in the morning. Yet, the kitchen showed evidence that breakfast preparations had been made hours later. This suggested that at least one keeper had survived the initial incident, only to disappear later while attempting to carry on normal routines. More disturbing still was the discovery of a message scratched into the stone windowsill of the watchroom. The words, barely visible and apparently carved with a metal tool, read, "They sing so sweetly now, we must join them. God forgive us, but we cannot resist the call." The handwriting according to experts who compared it with official documents, belonged to Thomas Marshall, the most level-headed and skeptical of the three keepers. Marshall had been known for his complete disbelief in supernatural phenomena, often mocking his colleagues' occasional references to island folklore. Yet here was evidence that even he had succumbed to whatever force had claimed them all. As winter deepened and the investigation continued, more witnesses came forward with accounts of strange phenomena around the Flannan Isles during December 1900. The keeper of a lighthouse 20 miles to the south reported seeing unusual lights moving beneath the water on several nights, accompanied by sounds that he described as like a cathedral choir singing in a language I've never heard. A fishing boat captain reported that his crew had refused to work the waters near the Flannans after December 10th, claiming that their nets brought up things that should not exist, fragments of bone carved with symbols, pieces of metal that seemed to shift and change when not directly observed, and seaweed that moved independently of any current. Most unsettling of all was the testimony of Mrs. MacArthur, the wife of the missing occasional keeper. She reported that her husband had been having vivid nightmares for weeks before his final assignment to Eilean Mor. In these dreams, he stood on the lighthouse platform while voices from the sea called his name, promising him wonders beyond imagination if he would only step into the waves. He would wake screaming, she told investigators, saying that something was waiting for him in the water, something that knew him better than he knew himself. I begged him not to take the posting, but he laughed and said dreams couldn't hurt a man. I should have held him back. I should have known. The official investigation concluded in February 1901 with a verdict that satisfied no one who had examined the evidence closely. The Northern Lighthouse Board attributed the disappearance to extreme weather conditions, suggesting that the keepers had been swept away while attempting to secure equipment during the storm. This explanation ignored the physical evidence, the psychological deterioration documented in Descartes' private notes, and the testimony of numerous witnesses who had observed supernatural phenomena in the area. But for those who had walked the empty rooms of the Flannan Lighthouse, who had seen the impossible damage to stone and steel, who had read the terrified final words of three rational men, the official explanation felt like a deliberate attempt to avoid confronting something far more disturbing than a simple weather accident. The truth, they suspected, lay somewhere in the dark waters that surrounded Eilean Mor, in depths where human understanding failed and ancient powers stirred with malevolent intelligence. In the months following the official investigation, the Northern Lighthouse Board faced an unprecedented challenge, finding replacement keepers willing to work at Eilean Mor. Word of the mysterious disappearance had spread throughout maritime communities, and the lighthouse acquired a reputation that made recruitment nearly impossible. Eventually, 3 brave souls accepted the posting. Principal Keeper Alan MacDougall, a deeply religious man who believed his faith would protect him from whatever had claimed his predecessors. Assistant Keeper William Campbell, a former naval officer who approached the assignment with military discipline. And occasional keeper Roderick MacPherson, a young man from the Hebrides who claimed familiarity with the old ways and ancient protections of island life. These new keepers arrived at Eilean Mor in March 1901, determined to restore normal operations to the lighthouse. The Northern Lighthouse Board had made modifications to the facility, installing additional safety equipment and establishing more frequent communication protocols with the mainland. A telephone cable was laid across the seabed, providing direct contact with headquarters for the first time in the lighthouse's history. But from the very first night, it became clear that whatever had claimed Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur had not departed with them. MacDougall's detailed journal, discovered years later, provides a chilling record of the terror that continued to plague Eilean Mor. His entries began normally enough, recording routine maintenance activities and weather observations. But within a week, disturbing patterns emerged. March 7th, Campbell reported hearing tapping sounds in the walls during his night watch. Investigated thoroughly, but found no cause. The sound follows a rhythm, almost like Morse code, but conveys no recognizable message. March 10th, MacPherson claims to see figures in the water during daylight hours. I see nothing, but the young man's terror is genuine. He speaks of shapes that move too purposefully to be seaweed or debris. March 14th, the telephone rings at precisely 3:17 each morning. When answered, there is only the sound of breathing, not human breathing, but something deeper, more labored, like air being drawn through water. As the days passed, MacDougall's entries became increasingly frantic. The 3 men found themselves experiencing the same psychological deterioration that had afflicted their predecessors. They heard voices calling from the sea, saw impossible movements in the water below, and felt an ungrowing compulsion to answer the summons that seemed to emanate from the depths. The breakthrough, or perhaps the final horror, came when MacDougall discovered a hidden compartment in Ducat's desk. Inside were documents that the previous principal keeper had apparently concealed from his colleagues and superiors. Research materials, newspaper clippings, and correspondence with scholars of maritime folklore and ancient history. Ducat, it appeared, had been investigating the history of the Flannan Isles for months before his disappearance. Driven by experiences he could not explain through conventional means, his research had uncovered references to the islands in texts dating back to the earliest Scottish chronicles, consistently describing them as places where the natural order broke down and older powers reasserted themselves. One document, a letter from Dr. MacLeod, dated November 1900, contained information that had apparently never been shared with the official investigation. My dear Ducat. He describes the Flannan waters as home to the eternal choir, beings that once walked on land but chose to return to the sea, taking with them songs of such beauty that no mortal could resist their call. According to the Chronicle, these entities emerge during the winter storms, when the barrier between our world and theirs grows thin. They seek to add new voices to their chorus, calling to those who spend too much time listening to the sea. The monk warns that iron and stone provide no protection against them, for they do not come as physical beings, but as pure song made manifest. I must urge you to abandon your post immediately. The Chronicle speaks of 3 signs that herald their awakening. First, the sound of voices in the storm. Second, the appearance of lights beneath the waves. And third, the irresistible compulsion to walk into the sea. If you have experienced any of these phenomena, you are already marked for joining their eternal song. This letter was dated 2 weeks before Descartes' disappearance. MacDougall shared this information with his colleagues, but rather than reassuring them, the knowledge only increased their terror. They now understood that they were not dealing with natural phenomena or psychological pressure, but with something far more ancient and malevolent entities that had been claiming lives in these waters for centuries. The new keepers implemented desperate protective measures based on MacDougall's research into traditional island defenses against sea spirits. They carved protective symbols into the lighthouse walls, burned rowan wood in the fireplace each night, and maintained constant prayers during the dangerous hours around 3:17 a.m. when the telephone calls came. For a few weeks, these measures seemed effective. The strange phenomena diminished, and the keepers began to hope they had found a way to coexist with whatever haunted the waters around Eilean Mor. But their relief was premature. 1901, the pattern repeated itself with terrifying familiarity. The relief vessel, Pharos, approached the island to find the lighthouse dark and silent. The landing party discovered the same scene that had greeted them 4 months earlier, an empty facility with signs of sudden abandonment. Breakfast half prepared, and the keepers vanished without trace. This time, however, they found additional evidence of what had occurred. MacDougall's journal lay open on the desk, its final entry dated the previous night. They have returned in force. All 3 of us hear them now, not just calling from the sea, but singing from inside the lighthouse itself. The walls resonate with their chorus, and we understand now that there is no escape. The iron and stone that we thought would protect us are nothing more than a trap, keeping us close until they are ready to claim us. Campbell has stopped eating. McPherson speaks only in whispers, saying that if he raises his voice, they will hear him and come sooner. I feel my own will slipping away, replaced by a desire to join the beautiful voices that fill every moment of silence. We have decided not to resist any longer. The song is too beautiful, and the loneliness of fighting it has become unbearable. If anyone finds this record, know that we go willingly to join something far greater than ourselves. The sea has always been calling us home. We were simply too deaf to hear it until now. Below this entry, in different handwriting that grew increasingly erratic, were the words, "The water is warm. The voices are so beautiful. We understand everything now." The Northern Lighthouse Board faced a crisis unlike anything in their institutional history. 2 complete crews had vanished from Eilean Mor under identical circumstances, leaving behind evidence of supernatural intervention that challenged every rational explanation. Public pressure mounted for the lighthouse to be decommissioned, but shipping interests argued that the beacon was essential for safe navigation through the treacherous waters. A radical solution was proposed. The lighthouse would be automated, operated remotely, without the need for permanent keepers. This would be one of the first fully automated lighthouses in the world. A technological marvel designed to solve a supernatural problem. The automation process took 2 years to complete, requiring the installation of advanced mechanical systems and backup power sources. During this period, the lighthouse remained dark, and shipping traffic reported a significant increase in near-miss incidents and actual wrecks in the area. When the automated Flannan Lighthouse finally became operational in 1903, it seemed that the nightmare had ended. The light burned steadily night after night, guided by clockwork mechanisms rather than human keepers. For several years, the installation functioned perfectly, and the supernatural incidents appeared to have ceased. But the respite was temporary. Beginning in 1910, ships passing the Flannan Isles began reporting new phenomena that suggested the ancient entities had not been banished, merely adapting to changed circumstances. Mariners spoke of seeing figures standing in the lighthouse beam, silhouettes that moved independently of any physical presence. Radio operators picked up transmissions from the direction of Eilean Mor. They expected automated signals, but voices singing in harmony. Their words unintelligible, but their emotional content unmistakably mournful and beckoning. The most disturbing reports came from vessels that passed the islands during severe storms. In these conditions, when the boundary between sea and sky dissolved in sheets of rain and spray, multiple witnesses reported seeing the lighthouse beam bend and curve impossibly, reaching down into the water like a luminous tentacle. Ships caught in this supernatural illumination found their compasses spinning wildly and their crews overcome, with an irresistible urge to alter course toward the islands. Several ships were lost in this manner. Coast Guard investigations invariably found the vessels empty, floating, abandoned in calm seas, with no trace of their crews. In each case, the ship S log contained final entries describing the crew's intention to join the eternal song or answer the call from the depths. Dr. Hamish McBride, a marine archaeologist who studied the Flannan phenomena in the 1960s, proposed a disturbing theory about the true nature of the entities haunting these waters. Based on his analysis of underwater formations around the islands, he suggested that the area was home to an ancient civilization that had deliberately submerged itself millennia ago, choosing to continue their existence beneath the waves rather than face extinction on land. According to McBride's hypothesis, these beings had maintained their culture and consciousness in their underwater realm, developing beyond human understanding during their long isolation. The songs heard by ships and lighthouse keepers were not merely supernatural phenomena, but attempts at communication by entities whose intelligence had evolved far beyond human comprehension. They do not see themselves as taking lives, McBride wrote in his controversial paper, The Submerged Civilization of the North Atlantic. From their perspective, they are offering transcendence, inviting chosen individuals to join a form of existence that surpasses human limitations. The tragedy is that human physiology cannot survive the transition they offer, making their gifts of enlightenment ultimately fatal to those who accept them. McBride's research was cut short when he disappeared during a diving expedition near Eilean Mor in 1967. His body was never recovered, but his diving equipment was found arranged on the shore in a precise pattern that resembled symbols carved into the lighthouse walls by previous victims. Today, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse continues to operate automatically, its beams sweeping across waters that have claimed dozens of lives over more than a century. Modern shipping traffic gives the area a wide berth when possible, guided by satellite navigation systems that eliminate the need to rely on the haunted beacon. But the disappearances have not ended. Every few years, a fishing boat or pleasure craft vanishes in the vicinity of the islands. Search and rescue operations invariably find empty vessels floating in calm seas, their crews gone without trace. The pattern remains consistent: abandoned meals, personal belongings left behind, and ship's logs describing the irresistible beauty of voices calling from the depths. The official position of maritime authorities remains unchanged. These incidents are attributed to extreme weather, human error, or equipment failure. But those who study the pattern know better. The eternal choir still sings in the depths around Eilean Mor, their ancient song as compelling today as it was when it first claimed James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur on that terrible night in December 1900. The lighthouse beam continues to sweep across the dark waters, no longer a beacon of safety, but a signal to something vast and patient that waits in the depths, calling to those who venture too close to hear its timeless, beautiful, and utterly fatal song. and sometimes all nights when the storms rage with particular fury around the Flannan Isles. Passing ships report that the automated lighthouse beam seems to pulse in rhythm, as if keeping time with music that mortals can hear but never survive.